What is the most embarrassing thing that you've bought? You might refer to your old dusty treadmill or the self-help book that you never read, but in my case, it was fake money. And I don't mean those dollar bills you see on TV shows. Ben Franklin wearing sunglasses. I'm talking about the fake money you can buy through in-game purchases in video games. The practice of buying fake goods in video games is seriously real, as well as other in-game products that simply don't exist, like loot boxes that randomize their produced outcomes so that the average player can't determine how much they're actually worth. This mental trickery is facilitated by huge game developers to make absurd amounts of money from their games, and real people are being exploited every day, including and especially children. I was one of those children because in 2016, I bought loot boxes for an online multiplayer first-person shooter game called Overwatch. Now, to say that I've spent over $200 on in-game purchases is wrong because I've probably spent more than that amount in total, and I simply don't really have the paper trail to verify what I did earn versus what I should have earned, and this is just one game that I've spent money in. I've been playing video games with my brother since I was about 5 years old. They've become one of my biggest passions, but through my time in the industry, I have seen the most popular games turn from well-designed titles into online casinos, deemed as video games by governmental rating boards, but I know the truth behind this obvious exploitation. And today I'd like to give you a window into that exploitation, the history of video game microtransactions, the state of the gaming industry currently, and why you should pressure your local senator to do something about predatory monetization, lest your children, family members, and even close friends be exploited by this greedy practice and develop mental disorders. So, how did this all start? Now, back in the early 1970s, arcades came onto the consumer market, with later titles like Space Invaders, Donkey Kong, and the infamous Pac-Man dazzling players. These games made up for their small file sizes by being endlessly replayable. Although notably quite difficult, arcades profited off of your individual quarters. But in order to sustain this business model, you needed to actively kill the player to prompt them to continue paying. Later, when gaming entered the household through consoles made by Nintendo and other companies, their games kept the same arcade design philosophy, such as using multiple lives and high score counters. Gamers were socially unified by sharing the secrets they found, referencing monthly magazines like Nintendo Power for cheat codes, and if you were like my brothers, spending hours in the arcade trying to beat the big top scores on the leaderboard. But the advent of the internet allowed for the same sharing of information and competition on a massive scale. In the 2000s, online gaming exploded onto the internet. Onto the market, of course. Massively multiplayer online games, called MMOs for short, became absurdly popular, with games like World of Warcraft reaching 11.5 million downloads within 5 years of its release, according to Eurogamer.net. Previously, players would purchase a boxed release of a game that would not be updated via the internet like today. Expansion packs were the main way of adding additional content to an existing game. These were separate packages that added large swaths of new content to a game. When online infrastructure became integrated into home consoles and PCs, digital marketplaces became commonplace. These marketplaces allowed players to buy new games and any additional content right from their homes. When I was a child, my brothers and I played Age of Empires, a game that required you to go to the game store and buy the expansion pack disc in order to get its additional content. But now, savvy gamers, not us, didn't have to make that trip. The biggest difference in this era is that there is no trickery. You're not being manipulated. Purchases give you a brand new product, and game developers could not make incremental changes to a game after you bought it. MMOs were different. They relied on internet infrastructure, and eventually developers understood that you can manipulate the player into purchasing something that is not equivalent in value to the product that developers used to offer. A popular online game in Korea, called MapleStory, emulated the process of buying gachapon, small toy capsules that involved you putting a coin in a machine for the chance of getting a toy figure of varying rarity. MapleStory implemented a system in which players could pay 100 yen for a ticket that guaranteed a random in-game item. You were no longer paying for an established product, you were paying for a mystery. Whereas gachapon machines in real life had queues and finite stock, players in video games had access to infinite stock, with the only detractor being how much money you spend. And because this was an online-only game, this meant that players who bought rare items were lauded as being the best, even though they might not have fairly earned their gear. Community is the lifeblood of an online game, but competition was being introduced by artificial means of earning progress. This psychological effect, deemed FOMO by researchers at the American Psychology Foundation, is extremely powerful, as it supposes that the player is incomplete because they're missing out on content that other players have access to. This was a turning point for developers. Game developers understood this dynamic, that instead of selling a product, they could sell the adrenaline spike that came with the potential of a product, according to the researchers at the American Journal of Drug and Alcohol Abuse. Investors understood that it was completely worthwhile to dedicate a lot of development time to the systems within the game designed to facilitate transactions. And so abusive monetization strategies took hold of the industry, with games like Farmville being the prefect of these. This game was accessible through Facebook. It was free to play. However, to progress quickly within the game, players were encouraged to spend farm cash, which is purchasable with real-world currency, of course. Gameplay per day was artificially limited by in-game timers. These slowed players' interactions with their farms, and they prompted them to speed them up by purchasing farm cash. And even more insidiously, these in-game currencies are intentionally designed to obscure the value that they're worth. So, for example, if you need 100 gems to buy a helmet in a game, and gem packs are only sold in either 90 or 205 packs, you're probably going to purchase the latter. But if you want the helmet worth 205 gems, and the next pack up is 500 gems, you purchase that pack. But if you want the helmet worth 505 gems, and you buy the maximum size pack of 500 gems, you still don't have enough money. And if there exists a higher pack, then you're more likely to purchase that higher pack. It's mentally exhausting for a player to do all this math, to deduce how much each gem is worth, and therefore what the pack is worth altogether. And this is an intentional extra mental step that developers designed to keep you purchasing. After all, if the helmet is worth it, then the pack must be too, right? This scenario is played out in every major multiplayer game, from Call of Duty to Fortnite. And this habit of spending causes real emotional damage. I need to emphasize that video game addiction is real. It's even being recognized by the World Health Organization, and that game design is actively causing and furthering addiction. Fortnite has an insanely huge global player population, and I can tell you from experience and from research by the American Journal of Nursing that it largely consists of children, and it's earned its publisher Epic Games over $9 billion from 2018 and 2019 combined. Every year it earns billions of dollars in revenue from in-game purchases because Fortnite is actually a free game that costs nothing to own. Players who spend more than 100,000 other players in these games combined are deemed whales by game developers, also according to the American Journal of Nursing. Their goal is to harpoon the average whale, not entertain the other 100,000. Now, I mentioned my $200 spent at the beginning of this presentation. Whales completely dwarf that, with just one whale named David Peets spending $20,000 on loot boxes in the game King's Raid over the past 5 years, according to an article featuring his story. I must emphasize that these whales are being psychologically manipulated and losing their battle. This issue is as much a financial issue as it is an emotional issue for so many across the globe, and it exists in a market that children are very susceptible to, given the prevalence of screens and mobile gaming. So surely there must be somebody fighting this. Yes, there are. The US government has proposed a bill regulating loot boxes, asking that their percentage rates be revealed, as told by the bill that's sponsored by Josh Hawley. Now, as well as fighting these companies, we should be treating those afflicted in similar ways that we help addicts in healthcare, according to the American Journal of Nursing. It's important to note that facilitated disorders such as these are being recognized at all, which is a wonderful thing, and it could lead to a great deal of laws from governing bodies curbing this issue. But even still, while other governments like England and Australia are considering addressing the issue too, according to our bill, the wheels of the law are turning, but really not at the rate that I would like. The same tactics of using corporate lobbyists and front groups are used here as in any other governmental issue. So, in conclusion, I do not have any blanket solution for this issue, but I highly encourage you to consider the way that you play games and enjoy media. Sit back and, whether you enjoy these games or not, consider how much damage they will do to your wallet if you give in. Recognize the history of manipulation and fight for its victims. When I mentioned my brothers at the beginning of this presentation, I didn't refer to how they were involved in multiplayer games too, and how they spent potentially thousands of dollars over several years on one game, RuneScape. While we were smart enough not to fall for its most egregious practices, they, and even myself, were caught. My advice to you is to play these games and stop the moment you get caught up. Dare not to spend real money on fake money. Thank you.